Is it illegal for the governor to remove lawmakers who deny quorum? It's a question raised since the governor cited an attorney general opinion to punish Texas House Democrats. Those Democrats fled to other states like New York, Illinois, and Massachusetts, preventing a vote to redraw congressional maps. KLTV7's Michael Richardson has our story.
It's more complicated than the governor probably presents.
Attorney Justin Roberts says Governor Greg Abbott cannot directly remove a House member from office. The opinion Abbott cites was written by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton in 2021, the last time House Democrats broke quorum.
One thing the Attorney General opinion does cite is a court opinion that says that the legislator themselves has to show the intention of abandoning their office. That's going to be a very high threshold to get past.
That's pretty bold, but we got a bold governor.
Republican State Senator Robert Nichols is skeptical the governor can remove members who do not show up to vote.
You have three branches of government: executive, legislative, and judicial, and I'm not sure one branch can go and remove pieces of the other without some type of due process.
This power grab in Texas is at a whole nother level.
State Representative James Tallarico is one of the Democratic lawmakers who fled the state to Illinois to stop what he says is a corrupt new congressional map from passing. He speaks on Abbott's threat to remove lawmakers like him who deny quorum.
It's very consistent because with these corrupt maps, Greg Abbott is trying to rob Texans of their ability to elect the candidates of their choice. And now he is literally threatening to remove the people's candidates and the people's elected officials from office.
Michael Richardson, KLTV7 News.
The Texas House is set to convene at 1 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Along with calling for their removal from office, the governor has ordered Texas DPS to arrest House members who deny quorum.